Hey everyone, it's VenomousStare. Today we're going to be previewing the Blizzcon groups. Now if you're not aware, Blizzcon is the big end-of-year tournament that always happens in the StarCraft 2 scene. It uses a seeding system that essentially works off of points. The points are accumulated throughout the year. If you win major tournaments like a WCS Montreal, then that means that you get a certain amount of points, and then essentially the top 16 players get to go to BlizzCon. You can see here, these were players that did relatively well over the year but missed the cut, TY being a notable one, and of course Scarlet as well as many others. A lot of these Korean players, when you sort of compare them to their foreigner counterparts, it's like, wow, there are a lot of really good Koreans who missed the cut. Like, Gumiho, Deer, TY, these are all probably top 32 players in the world. But BlizzCon doesn't have any slouches in it. But before we get into reviewing the groups, I'd like to touch on one piece of StarCraft news. In a couple days, Blizzard is going to release the Jeffrey John Vincent Robinson, aka IncontroL, voice pack out to everyone. And they mentioned there would be a couple other things they were giving out, presumably like little profile pictures or a spray or something. But that's great. Obviously, IncontroL passed away a few months ago, and BlizzCon's not going to be the same without him. BlizzCon is a time where the best of the StarCraft 2 scene gather from across the world. It's not region locked. You get plenty of Korean versus foreigner, but it's also where the best casters gather, and it's just not going to be the same without IncontroL. So let's jump into the groups. Group A, we have Dark, who is a Korean Zerg, probably the best Korean Zerg out there. He's a great macro player. He's also not afraid to do cheeses. Against Showtime. Now, Showtime is a German macro Protoss. And out of everybody here, I would say that Showtime and Hero Marine are the weakest out of all the players who qualified for BlizzCon. So, that being said, I'm going to really edge Dark here. I think that Dark will probably win the series very handily. And I expect Dark to at least make it to the round of 8. So then we have Sue and Special. If you don't know who Sue is, he essentially is a guy who always makes it to the GSL finals and has never won one. You really feel for the guy. He's gotten so many silvers, so many second places. And whenever you look at the GSL and see the champions, a lot of times the person who ends up winning GSL, the metagame fits them perfectly. They're top tier. They get a little lucky and they go on a magical run. It is very, very hard to win a GSL. And although Sue has been consistently excellent for a long time, he has run into various meat grinders in the GSL finals. He's facing off against Special, the Mexican Terran, one of my favorite players, a really cool guy, and a guy who has spent a lot of time in Korea training and even made some semi-deep runs in the GSL. He made it out of the first round, but recently Special was knocked out of the GSL by Keen. Keen is sort of this perennial round of 32 guy that's not very good. He also beat Scarlet. So from my perspective, Special is on a little bit of a downswing. If BlizzCon had happened, 6 or 7 months ago, Special would be a real threat here to make a deep run. As it stands, he's going to be solid. He might even make it out of this group, but I think I favor Sue here, even though I think that Special's TVZ is very good. And oftentimes, he's been a pioneer in using mech styles, even though pretty much everyone is a big proponent of the BC builds now, and it's just become a part of every Terran player's repertoire. Special is a guy who really tried these mech builds early on back in the day when everyone was going bio. But I am going to edge Sue here. So I have both of the Korean Zergs making it out of Group A. Now Group B is interesting. It's the Group of Death. You have Maru, the multiple-time GSL winner, Time, an incredibly strong Chinese player who excels versus Zerg, Stats, who's the best macro Protoss, and Serral, who's the best foreigner ever and the best player in the world, and a great macro Zerg. So Maru and Time is interesting because they played in GSL versus the world. Time specifically asked to play against Maru, got super far ahead early, and then basically did the classic mistake that many StarCraft 2 players do, where they're ahead and they want to end the game, so they keep attacking and sort of squander their advantage, and Maru would come back to win. I really think that Maru has the advantage in this series. I don't think that Time is going to be able to defeat him. Maru overall is a good player, and I sort of view Time more as a versus Zerg sniper. I think if Time was facing Serral, even though Serral's god tier, facing off against a Zerg really would give him his best chance to win. His pressure builds and his multitask is probably the best part of his game. But I edge Maru there, even though I'm not really all that confident in Maru right now, because even though he's widely considered to be one of the best players, and he of course won all those GSLs, you really have to look at his recent performances. A lot of his games, he does not look good at all. He looks pretty lost, frankly. And a lot of times when Maru does really well, he mixes in a lot of cheese. He's very unpredictable. And I think that a lot of times whenever people start to figure that out or really expect that against you, you can look bad. That's one of the easiest ways to look bad in a StarCraft 2 game. Now here we have the best match of the round of 16. It's going to be Stats and Serral, two macro powerhouses. Stats was one of the few players to be able to defeat Serral in a major tournament in the last year, so this is a great opening match. I really do still edge Serral here, but I do think that Stats will make it out of the group. I think that Stats has an incredible PVT, and against a guy like Maru, who a lot of times whenever you see Maru do well, he can take tiny little skill discrepancies and make them look massive with this perfect multitasking and just excellent use of drops. Stats is probably the one Protoss who I would trust the most to deal with that style of play. He is the best at this defensive reactionary Protoss approach, and I think the second best is actually Trap. But as it stands, I edge Serral, but I also think Stats will make it out of this group, so I'm going to say Stats and Serral, mainly because I think Maru will run into Stats at some point and have a little trouble. So Group C. Classic, Hero Marine, Hero, and Raynor. Classic is sort of a solid all-around Protoss player. I sort of look at him in a similar way that I look at Zest, who is a guy who narrowly missed it. Remember, with a lot of these Korean players, sometimes they get brutal draws in the GSL and they lose in the round of 32 because they get some insane group, because the GSL is just packed to the gills with top-tier players, and they don't have a lot of other opportunities to stack up points. Look at Innovation. Innovation didn't really look bad at any point in the year, but he ran into some hard groups, some great players, got knocked out early, and he's going to miss Blizzcon. If I could pick one person that could sort of, I guess, be a replacement if one of these guys couldn't make it or missed their flight or something, Innovation would be the guy I would pick. Even though it's not like, he's the ranked 17th guy that just made the cut. Just missed the cut, rather. Then we have Hero Marine, who is a German macro Terran who favors bio play very heavily. Hero, known for his incredibly sharp builds and timings facing off against Raynor. Now that's going to be another stellar matchup. And I'd like to point out, notice the lack of mirror matchups in here. The only one you have in the opening series is Time and Maru, and that one has some recent history, and I don't even really mind that. Also, I think TVT is probably the best mirror matchup to watch, but I just love that we didn't get a bunch of mirrors in the opening round, because frankly a lot of times if it's a mirror matchup I'm just really going to lose interest rather quickly. So Classic and Hero Marine, I really favor Classic here. I think his style matches up well against Hero Marine. Hero Marine is solid, but I think when you compare him to the absolute upper echelon of players, the top tier, BlizzCon type players, falls a little bit short. I think that Hero Marine will be the first one eliminated out of this group. Classic will take the screws to him. But as far as Hero and Raynor goes, this is such an exciting series because Raynor is probably the second best foreigner Zerg right now to Serral, and he's one of the few guys that can take games off of Serral that we've seen tournament-wise. And Hero is this guy known for his incredibly sharp array of builds, and I think his best matchup is versus Zerg. That is really where your Protoss builds can shine the best, I believe, is versus Zerg. But I am going to edge Raynor here. I think this series will go to 5 games. If you're a Protoss player, I would look at this series to copy builds from. So I predict Raynor and Classic to advance. Although Hero is always fun to watch. This is not Liquid Hero, by the way, if you're sort of a casual fan and haven't been following. This is a different guy, CJ Hero. Now, for the people who have only been following the game for a few years, they probably even know who Liquid Hero is. But basically, Hero is one of these IDs where multiple people will use, and it's sort of confusing. Rain was like that as well. There's some other examples. So finally, Group D, we have Trap and a Laser, and then Rogue and Neeb, two PVZs. Trap is the second best macro Protoss in the world, only, second to stats. A Laser's a scary polar Zerg. He likes to mix in a lot of aggressive play. He's at his best when he tries to mix in aggressive play and be unpredictable. He sort of went through a rough patch in his career where he was trying to play too macro, too much like Serral, too much of a hard committal macro only style, whereas he's better when he mixes in these aggressive builds. Although I do favor Trap here, I think Trap will be very hard to throw off his game. It's very similar to Stats in the fact that he's one of the Protoss players that reacts the best to aggressive play and cheesy play. And then we have probably the second most interesting matchup of the round of 16, Rogue and Neeb, and it's very similar to Stats and Serral in the sense that these are two guys at the very tip top of the race. Rogue is probably the second best Korean Zerg in the world and top 3 Zerg in the world, and Neeb is probably America's best player. And it's probably not even close, actually, especially if you don't count Mexico or Canada as part of the Americas, which frequently in StarCraft that happens quite a bit. Like America, and by America I mean North America, obviously, has sort of adopted special. Like, you're close enough to Texas. Like, we'll pretend you're American. But true Americans, Neeb is the best, and he's facing off against Rogue, who is just incredible. I think this is another series that will go 5 games, although I edge Rogue slightly. But I really do think Neeb can go into that lower bracket and do well. I really have a hard time seeing a Laser getting out of this group. There's just too much solid play. It's sort of a bad group for a Laser in a way because as an unpredictable guy, I guess that style works out decently well against Neeb, but a guy like Hero Marine I feel like would be a way easier target. A guy like Showtime would be an easier target to use these builds against, but it's going to be hard to beat Rogue and Trap. So those are my predictions for the BlizzCon groups. Make sure you like, comment, and sub, and tell me who you think is going to make it out of groups.